Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, the executive editor of the American Prospect, one of my daily reads. Really, frankly, since David Dayen took it over, what was it now? 5 years ago?
Yeah.
5 years? Oh, geez. David, welcome to the show. Not the interview I want to do with you today. I was hoping that we would be doing your day one agenda for the Harris administration. That's not going to happen.
That has been put in a file listed 2029 or later.
Right. What? All right. I don't know. Your first thoughts, I guess.
Well, I think that there's a perspective that we all have to take on. In the last 20 years, there have been 10 national elections. In 9 of those 10 elections, either the presidency or one chamber of Congress has changed hands. This is only the 3rd time in American history that there have been 3 consecutive one-term presidencies. The only other 2 times were the very tumultuous period before the Civil War and the post-Reconstruction period from 1876 to 1896, which was the height of the Gilded Age. We are in an unusually volatile political moment, and I believe that is rooted in a lack of ability, desire, name your price, on the part of both political parties to meet the needs of the American people.
And so people are constantly dissatisfied and flip.
Right. They ping pong back and forth. Maybe this party will help me. Maybe that party will help me. I mean, in that 20-year period, there are probably 3 or 4 elections that at the time were determined to be realignments, including this one. The 2008 election of Barack Obama was said that now there's an enduring Democratic majority. The 2016 election of Donald Trump was said that now there's an enduring Democratic majority. The 2024 election is being termed in that fashion as well. All of those prior so-called realignments, the very next election, the voters moved rapidly in the direction of the other party. So something is going on here, and it has to do with, there are structural issues that speak to this dissatisfaction, both culturally and I think constitutionally. And there are issues with the parties themselves not speaking to that discontent or speaking to it in a way that ultimately is unsatisfying once the results are shown.
Well, it's also global, right? The anti-incumbency phenomenon this cycle, which maybe when you're looking back at history, if we're talking about the Gilded Age or Reconstruction, it could be viewed as this dissatisfaction with neoliberalism in the West that creates that volatility and that lack of meaning in other Western governments as well, which they've seen.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true globally. This is the first time in 120 years where every major industrialized nation saw their incumbent party lose. That is, it didn't matter whether that party was ideologically on the left or on the right. But more practically, that speaks to the inflation that happened after the pandemic. And I think what we've clearly learned is that people hate inflation. That when you're talking about a situation of mass unemployment, even if it's extreme, you're talking about 10 million families, maybe 15 million families if it's really, really bad. When you're talking about inflation, that affects every family that isn't fabulously wealthy enough to not notice. And clearly, that has had a very strong pull in the direction of an anti-incumbency mood, and it's happened everywhere.
And even if in certain cohorts wages theoretically outpace inflation, that seems to be not mitigating in any way to people's experience. I mean, it may or may not be mitigating in reality. I don't know, because, it's one thing to look at like sort of like the broad statistics. I'm not necessarily getting that wage increase, and my eggs have definitely gone up type of situation. But so,
yeah, I mean, I think that, there are a couple other factors here that cut against this kind of argument that, look, we had a great economy and voters picked the other party. And so providing great things doesn't work. This is a bit of an infuriating mode of argument that I've seen deployed by many people who should know better. We had a pop-up pandemic era safety net that was put in place in 2020, and all of it was taken away under Joe Biden.
Right.
Now, forget about who's responsible for that.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that if you had Medicaid and you were one of the millions and millions of people that had it taken away from you, it was taken away from you under Joe Biden. If you had boosts in unemployment insurance, it was taken away from you under Joe Biden.
Child tax credit.
Child
tax credit. You're getting you're getting $300 a month, and all of a sudden it goes away. Nobody's out there. I mean, literally, I've been saying this every day since the election. Nobody out there is going like, well, I appreciate the Democrats giving it to me, but Joe Manchin just made it impossible for me to have it. People don't know this. I mean,
your student loans restarted too. For 40 million people, your student loans restarted under Biden.
On some level,
forget about the agency of who actually is responsible for that. That's the lived experience. And the other part of the lived experience is the rise in interest rates, meaning that it's just the cost of borrowing went way, way up in the last 2 years, and it hasn't really subsided. Right. We've had one interest rate tick down. The second one happened just after the election last week. That means a mortgage, an auto loan, a consumer loan is all more under this regime. And so
I should say about mortgage rates. I just say about mortgage rates, they didn't really come down commensurate with the drop in the Fed interest rate.
They haven't yet. No, they haven't yet. Although they did come down before in anticipation of it. It was kind of. But then it popped back up. Yes.
Yeah. But, I mean, when you think of those type of headwinds, it's almost it is in some ways surprising that it's still as close as it is, right? I mean, like, Donald Trump got the same.
I don't want to soft pedal what Joe Biden did. There were a lot of things. Full employment is a thing. The actual core inflation of certain goods has gone down. We actually haven't seen grocery inflation in over a year. But you can't escape that there was a reality that people felt that don't match aggregate statistics. And I think that's the really important thing. The other thing is that the things that Joe Biden did that are probably going to be the most impactful over time are happening on very long time horizons. We right now have the biggest boost in manufacturing construction practically that we've seen in American history. However, that's manufacturing construction done mostly by itinerant workers and often by foreign workers. This is not permanent manufacturing jobs in a community. We don't have that just yet because it takes time to build a factory. Similarly, there were some unforced errors in this regard. The Inflation Reduction Act provision around negotiating drug prices in Medicare, some of the negotiations have begun, but the actual effect in terms of prices doesn't hit until 2026. That's how the law was written, and it has no help to
Why do they do
candidates who are
this?
trying to.
Why do they do this?
Exactly.
They did this with Obamacare too. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like they, and I understand on Obamacare, they did this because, they needed to make it seem like it was cheaper. And so they needed to sort of like elongate the period of time that it was.
Just the opposite with this. It
But
makes
why?
it more
Yes. Yes.
expensive.
Why would you do that?
It,
Like,
it
it's a
made the
political
Inflation
matter.
Reduction Act
Why
more
would you do that?
expensive to not do it that way.
And
the bottom line is on this one is that it's a crass benefit for lobbyists. I mean, it was just to delay this to give drug companies time to earn more profits. It was the small coterie of pro-pharma Democrats that said, okay, well, I guess we have to do this, but let's do it later. Let's push it out. Let's push it out. Let's let them gain some more profits. And so that was the political result of that.
I mean, and it seems to me that the Trump administration could be in position to repeal that and not pay the price of repealing it because nobody knows it's in effect. It would be in effect anyways. I mean, so I guess.
Or on the flip side, they could just take credit for it. I mean,
or they may just take credit for it. Either way, it's. I just want to go back to this, the loss thing, because I think, it may not be fair to say, where's my child tax credits, Joe Biden, and then your proxy, Kamala Harris. But it seems to me, and I imagine you and I had this conversation, and we certainly had it, Emma and I, that the die was somewhat cast in March of 2021. The Democrats had passed the American Rescue Act. The Republican Party their response was to be outraged at 3 Dr. Seuss books that were no longer being published. I'm being literally, this is literally the case. They were this massive bump in social welfare gets passed by the Democrats, almost exclusively Democrats. I mean, like in both chambers. Yeah. And
no, it wasn't exclusively.
All they're talking about is Dr. Seuss.
Do you have this chart, Bradley? This just helps augment your point here. I mean, this is where like there was this drop off.
This is in March of 2022.
I know,
but I'm talking about 2021. Yeah. And instead of going right in to the Build Back Better,
right?
Instead of like going into those negotiations and saying, I want to build Chuck Schumer and I want it September 15th of this year, he invites in the Republicans. They dick around for 2 or 3 months. That's when Joe Manchin's audio comes out of him, basically starting to realize like, oh, wait a second, I got to go the other way with this, even after he had said $4 trillion. And then they let Sinema and Portman come in and dick around, and they lose all of the momentum. They allow people like Manchin to develop the war chest and the relationships to fight against this. And then it gets mired for another year and a half, and it ends up being split apart.
Well, I don't know that even in your proposed quick strike scenario that Joe Manchin then becomes a reliable partner of the Democratic Party.
I just don't think he would have had the
same
time.
With Kirsten Sinema. I mean, no, I think that the reality is that there wasn't really a working majority for what certainly the vast majority of Democrats wanted at that point. And so they had to be brought along. Now, it's deeply frustrating, and it was a real problem that was kind of masked by the Dobbs decision and what happened in the 2022 elections and candidate quality on the Republican side that masked a loss. Actually, the national popular vote in the House in 2022 was Democrats lost that by a couple points, and they're going to lose the presidency national popular vote by probably the exact same amount, by like 2 points. So really nothing changed from 2022 to 2024 in that regard. It is certainly true that spending the better part of 2 years of that crucial part of Biden's presidency mired in negotiations where the most vocal and leading face of the Democratic Party, from anyone who would just sort of look up at the television and see it, was Joe Manchin, because he was the one being asked about everything, was not good for the brand of the Democratic Party. I mean, that's certainly true.
Well, neither was Biden. I mean, that's the problem is just that in this information age, right, we're seeing some of the breakdowns of how these Trump voters consume their information. And a lot of this can be condescending or whatever, but it is obvious that a lot social media and online news, or people that paid attention less to the news, broke for Trump at the end of the day. And Biden not being able to articulate this kind of stuff towards the end of his presidency, I think really hurt, because there was no overarching vision for what the Democrats were selling. I mean, you know what Trump's vision is when you hear him talk. He's going to be a breaker, and he's a nativist, and he's going to crack down on immigration and whatever. But what was the brand of what the Democrats were offering? I think it was really hurt in the time period where there was a leadership vacuum and a branding vacuum that Biden contributed to. And then when they talk about democracy, how can you make the case that democracy is on the ballot when they didn't even go through a primary process, which creates, in hindsight, some democratic legitimacy, but also Biden's presence undercuts the democracy point in and of itself because he seems incompetent and unable to do the job. How can you sell that urgency with him being the face? I mean,
I am less. I don't think that there was a single person out there who voted against or voted for Trump because there was no primary. But the loss of a primary,
right,
as a process in and of itself, would have maybe made a candidate more sensitive to what actual issues were out there.
Or spotlighted, other Democratic policy proposals for a year and a half.
Exactly.
As opposed to this whole lead up to that debate where Democrats weren't out there, on the presidential level. The first debate with Biden.
That would have required Biden to have left the office.
Exactly.
Year and change ago. Policies for future administrations, you've got that in your 2029 file, God willing. What do you see, like, assuming that they have the trifecta, or really the quad, with the judiciary? I mean, because that to me is most relevant. Like, where do you see, what is the opportunity? Are there opportunities to slow their roll? I mean, I think there's going to be an overreach, but I wonder, like, from your perspective, David, like, when you sit back and go, as you think about, where the American prospect's going to be over the next 4 years, like, what angles are you guys contemplating?
Well, I mean, the first thing, just to speak to some of Emma's comments, I don't know who the Democratic Party is right now. I mean, who are you talking about? Who are the leaders of the party? What does the party stand for? I mean, I think the biggest thing is that Democrats need to figure that out for themselves. They're not going to have a lot of opportunities outside of litigation at the state level, which certainly can slow down some of the things that the Trump administration is going to try to do. But there's a sort of parallel conversation that needs to be held about what this party really stands for and is about. There's kind of a huge set of internal contradictions that need to be worked out and managed. There's a contradiction between a historically working class party and a billionaire donor class. There's a contradiction between a historically, maybe not even that historically pacifist or anti-war faction, and the very neoconservative ascendancy of a lot of key stakeholders in the party. And so I think that that is probably what Democrats are going to need to focus on during this time in the wilderness. Going back to what I brought up initially, is there's no reason not to believe that 2026 will not be, I think I did the double negatives right, the 10th out of the 11 last elections where a chamber of Congress or the presidency changes hands. It is very likely that there will be a backlash to Trump. There was in the 2017 to 2021 period. He lost the 2018 elections pretty handily. Seems like when he's not on the ballot, he cannot transfer his base to individual House and Senate candidates. And so Democrats are somewhat well positioned to take back the House, at least. The Senate's going to be a much taller order given the map and the various kind of inadequacies of Senate apportionment and just the real difficulties that Democrats have in even lightly red states. So there's no reason that Democrats could defer this conversation once again and muddle through and win the House in 26 and then come back and have that primary in 28 and do what they do. What I would say is that Democrats have a massive tendency towards conflict aversion. We see that in the inability to have any conversation about the House and Senate leadership right now. Right. Nobody is talking about the fact that Chuck Schumer, who famously said, if we lose 2 blue-collar workers in Pennsylvania, then we'll gain 2 suburban moms, and we can do that across the country. The very strategy that has now locked Democrats out of a majority coalition in the nation. The fact that there is no, outside of random people, no institutional calls for a leadership election there. Same in the House. There is a bias towards not having these hard conversations, not having these discussions. And finger pointing and recriminations is not having the discussion, by the way. It's one thing to just say, the progressives should get, the party should get more progressive, the party should get more moderate, or we should throw out this part of the tent, or we should throw out this member of the coalition. That's actually not having the discussion. That's just restating their priors. The truth is that we had a national swing away from Democrats at every level, in every subgroup. Democrats don't get to play the fun game that they play every time they lose an election, where they get to just pick one subgroup and blame them. It's their fault, and kick them out of the coalition, then we'll be better off. Never works. But Democrats can't do that now. They lost among everybody. They lost more in big cities than they did in small towns. They lost more among subgroups of color than they did among white people. So you can't slice and dice on this and try to put the calculation together for a majority. There is something structurally wrong, and until you actually have the conversation about it, we're just going to be spinning our wheels. Is
the that structurally wrong thing? Is it a policy thing, or is it a communications? I mean, I just remember in 2012, in the wake of the 2012 of Obama winning, that the Republican Party was like, we're doing an autopsy. And I just remember Sean Hannity going, folks, we've got to be more open to immigrants. And that lasted for like 3 or 4 months. And then all of a sudden they realized, actually, no, we don't. And then they went on what is now a 12-year crusade to demonize immigrants, and it worked. Yep. It worked, to the point where at the beginning, they got Democrats to help them. They basically pulled the Democrats into that vortex. Look, Obama deported a tremendous amount of people. It was, their strategy was supposedly in service of like trying to help DACA and DAPA and get to some type of like piece of legislation that would rationalize the whole process, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's poor tactics. Broadly speaking, their strategy was to welcome immigrants, even though in their minds they're like, only way we can legitimately do it is to deport a ton as well. Aside from that, obviously not working, like, is it a question of reorientation of the, I mean, part of their communication strategy, frankly, was belied by the fact that, you know, they were both like Mark Cuban's out there and they're running on like an anti-corporate record. Like, how do you,
right?
It's
What's
tough
the message?
to square that circle,
Well,
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said about the internal contradictions. Do you guys get mad when everybody's out there saying, well, what we need is a liberal Joe Rogan? And you're like, come on, man. We're right here.
I think, listen, she should have probably done just the Rogan that was there because, you know, it's a problem. Does it bother me? No, there's no way to have the exact same thing as them on the right. Like, you know, I've been down this road with Air America. Do we need more communication? Without a doubt, of course, but they also, there is a fundamental misunderstanding, it seems to me, within the campaign professionals, because you have people who are saying, you know, like we mentioned, you know, Joe Scarborough saying, you know, we can't be the party of woke and whatnot. Kamala Harris was so like I think effective at avoiding any of those conversations. People knew that she was a black woman, and I have no doubt that accounts for a significant percentage of votes against her. Like, she's not going to say, she could say, you know, it is the sun is shining at 12 noon, and there's still going to be some skepticism. Well, you know, like some irrational skepticism
Tuning
of her
out.
assertion, whatever, however it is, because, you know, there are people who have.
They also had her on tape saying a bunch of stuff in 2019 as part of her
100%.
presidential race.
But the fact is that like their ability to run with that was at first stifled by the whole "you're weird" thing, because she's not running on this. She said it, yes, on tape. And we have Donald Trump saying that he's going to be a dictator on tape. We have Donald Trump saying, I'm going to grab, you know, people's vaginas and I can get away with it on tape. But the reason why they're able to have their, you know, a huge portion of their electorate believe that the agenda of the Democrats is to turn everybody transgender, as opposed to like, we just believe in rights for everybody, is because there was no response. And the proper response to them saying that is, you're weird. We're not talking about that. You're the ones who are talking about that. We don't have a plank that says we're going to impose transgenderism on everybody. You're the ones bringing this up. And they did not, so
that was a great messaging strategy that ended about 2 weeks after they started it, and they never put Tim Walz on television.
Well, exactly. Like that. I mean, you know, I think in the Clinton loss, there was probably like 6, 7 but-fors, right? Like it was, the margins were close enough that if Comey later doesn't come out, maybe she wins. If she campaigns in Michigan and Wisconsin, maybe she wins. If, you know, like there's literally, I think, like a half dozen of those. In this instance, I think there's no one thing why she lost. There were too many things that contributed to it because the margins were too big. But there were mistakes made that I think are indicative of like sort of like a fear of confrontation, that they were overtaken by the people who wanted to be seen as bipartisan. And the same people who I think, you know, and maybe it was just Joe Biden, said, let's bring the Republicans in when we have all the momentum before Build Back Better. It's the same mentality. And, I hope
but
we
don't
grow
you
out
feel
of it.
like that? Don't you feel like that is a reflective of the broad mass of the Democratic base? I think the conflict aversion goes beyond the individual leaders in the party. I think they're a reflection of their constituents.
I think that's true, but I also think that you're a professional politician, and there's a way in which you can be more effective, and maybe as you do that, you will see that people come along.
By the same token, you're a professional politician, and so the idea that you were forced by some interest group to say, let's take for an example what Kamala Harris, the ad that we saw over and over again, particularly on football games, the she's for they, them, and we're for you, where she was talking about transgenders and surgeries and for incarcerated individuals. The idea that she was, the way that it's talked about is that she was practically held at gunpoint by the progressive groups and forced to say this as if it was a hostage video, and then it was used to this great effect. If you're a politician, you're responsible for the words that you say,
right?
And I think what that speaks to more generally is how the tendency from a lot of Democratic leaders to not have really any base set of principles in mind, and then just pick up things stray from whatever group says that we have 10,000 votes that we can get you. And it ends up getting Democrats into trouble because, if you look at the actual realignments in American politics in the last 100 years, there are really only two. There's FDR and there's Ronald Reagan.
Right.
And what FDR and Ronald Reagan had in common is that they persuaded the public that they believed in their views and that they were willing to enact them. And that is what I think is very lacking in the Democratic Party today.
Well,
you didn't look at Kamala Harris and say, yeah, she believes in something. She has a consistent set of beliefs. And you look at FDR and you even look at Ronald Reagan and you say that.
Yeah, I think look, I don't think that she would have been the nominee had there been an actual primary, that was held a year and a half ago. I just don't think it would have been. I think she failed in 2019 for that same reason. And there may have been, some desperation in her taking, sort of like positions. But I also think that a better politician who actually did have a narrative could have said that in 2019 and it wouldn't have played a role. It doesn't matter what the Republicans are saying if you address it as like, you're talking about an edge case. But the irony is that, okay, I'm looking at this Greg Sargent piece in New Republic. In the New Republic. And this is also sort of fascinating because when the Dems were testing sort of messaging, voters didn't hold Trump responsible for appointing the Supreme Court justices to overturn Roe v. Wade. They didn't believe Trump himself was sincerely anti-choice. They didn't find him personally responsible for the fall of Roe, the operative said, adding voters thought he's ambivalent about abortion, perversely enough, because they didn't think he had core principles. And so people imposed upon him, and this was the failure, it seems to me, the one sort of like bedrock principle of Democratic politics is there are good Republicans. like the idea that, and I'm not saying you have to attack the voters, but the idea that they did it. Schumer did it with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. Biden did it with McConnell, Nancy Pelosi. We need to have a Republican Party. The whole project of MAGA extremist Republicans, as opposed to No, it's Republicans. Donald Trump is there, like Grover Norquist said 10 years ago. Give us a guy with a pulse who can hold a pen and we'll do the rest of the work. That's what's going to happen here. Donald Trump will say, like, guys, I want the thing so that I can make the money. And then you guys handle the rest. And that's what's going to happen. And if you do not fuse the Republican Party to someone like Donald Trump, this is what you get.
Him.
This is what you get.
I just want to add to that really quickly because we're seeing in Nevada that apparently there were people that like tens of thousands of voters that just showed up to vote for Trump and then didn't vote for anyone else down ballot.
Not only didn't vote for Sam Brown, was the Republican Senate candidate, but in Nevada it's very unique where you can actually vote for none of the above in all races. It's one of the few states where you can actually do that. And in that Senate race, there were tons of none of the above votes in that Senate race. Almost enough to swing the election. So it wasn't just that they were like, I'm voting for Trump and nobody else. I'm voting for Trump and I'm actively not voting. Right. Like I'm actively saying none of you in the Senate race.
So to Sam's point, this strategy has in effect exceptionalized him outside of the Republican Party, and people are dissatisfied with the establishment of both parties. So with their saying all these Republicans hate him, well, they hate the Republicans too, some of these voters, and they hate the Democrats. So they're going to go with the guy that is reviled by others. And he travels well on social media, and he has great name recognition where she had an issue there too.
The other thing I would say is that I think we need to do a better job of critically looking at public opinion. Public opinion polls seem to be driving too much conversation in Democratic politics more generally. And I don't believe that these narrators that you talk about who said, Trump's not, I don't hold him responsible for that. I don't believe they are reliable narrators of their own lives and their own thoughts. I am extremely skeptical that they aren't saying that for any other reason than to make an excuse for themselves. That people compartmentalize, they rationalize, and they wanted to vote for Trump because they paid $4 a pound for something they paid $2 a pound for before, and they're not going to let something like women's lives and women's reproductive rights get in the way.
Well, I think that's true, but I do think that if you give them the opportunity to rationalize it, then they'll take it. And if you don't give them the opportunity to rationalize, you're going to get more votes. I mean, I agree with you. People do all sorts of mental gymnastics to follow where they want to go. But if you make those gymnastics harder, sometimes they don't go there. Right. That's the reality of it. I think the reason why
it's like you can't fight something with nothing. And, too often Democrats fight something with saying, see, they're going to,
100%. This is all
the idea of
plan beats no
partisanship.
plan.
Right.
This is all plan beats no plan.
Partisanship has suffused Democratic strategy to the extent that, it really is that I can really show you respected people on the Democratic left saying things like policies don't matter, like period, end stop. Policies don't matter. Helping people doesn't matter. What you do in office doesn't matter. I don't know what they believe does matter in that instance, but the point is that they have bought their own bullshit that, I'm sorry, can I say that?
Yes.
Whatever. They've bought their own bullshit that the only thing that matters is demonizing your opponent. And I think what the electorate has figured out is that actually, if all you're offering me is how bad this other guy is, then you're not offering me anything to grab onto. And I know what I just paid for gas, or I know what I I know what I used to pay in these instances, and I'm just going to go in the other direction.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. A plan is always, you may not have liked Donald Trump's plan, but he had a plan that people could affirmatively say, like, well, at least he's going to do something. And
not just a plan, but a brand, which
it
is a
becomes
message.
the same thing. I mean, on some level, it's a narrative that things go into it.
But Democrats are struggling to brand themselves or come up with a narrative in this new information environment that's like increasingly fractured and corroded. And it's difficult for them to come up with anything, especially because they're juggling all these constituencies that we describe. Trump Republicans we want them on board, and we whatever. And how can they be the party of unions when they're also courting over $100,000 voters with their messaging?
Like two things. Number one, to Emma's point, popular front politics are messy. I mean, it's just hard to stitch a coalition together like that and keep everybody happy. But the second thing is, I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. I mean, we are in an era of perpetual change elections, and the only way that ends is if the electorate becomes satisfied that they're going to get what they want out of a term of office. Trump failed in that opportunity 4 years ago. We're going to see if he can succeed with, he had a unified Republican control of government in 2017. He didn't do a whole lot with it. We're going to, other than tax cuts, which he's going to get again. We're going to see what he can do in this 4-year term. And if he fails to deliver, then we're going to have the continuation of the ping pong match. The difference is, as we've been saying, Trump at least has a vision for what that delivery is, and I don't think Democrats have that vision.
Yeah, and I just to reiterate your point about those people, and I can, off the top of my head, I'm thinking like the Matt Iglesias and the Jonathan Chaits, and about deliverism doesn't work, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things about having policies that favor providing the most amount of people with the most amount of benefit is that it makes it harder for the Mark Cubans or whomever it is to come in and muddy the message. They stay away at that point. I mean, like, who you're providing for also dictates the kind of campaigns you can run, because they're the ones that are you're relying on their support for. Like, your constituencies matter. And I think like the idea, aside from deliverism, sort of like may take some time. In fact, I think, we have clear indication that some of it was also pullbackism and, we're going to take it backism.
Imagine undeliverism.
Right. Yes. Like a sort of an undeliverism. But
here's the other thing I want to say, though. I think Trump gained an insight into how politics works in his first term. And that insight is that the structural nature of American politics is pretty broken, that there are high veto points, there's a scleroticism within the bureaucracy, there's an inability to get things done. Project 2025 was a response to that. It says, well, actually, if you want to think about how you're going to, provide your agenda and move your agenda forward, you actually have to neutralize these veto points. You have to take them out one by one. And that, I think, is, we'll see if that works, but that, I think, is what was learned. Now, unfortunately...
Can I just add to that? Peter Thiel was out there, 8 months ago saying this is like Weimar Germany, and we need, people are tired of liberal democracy, and we need to widen the Overton window in terms of like how we deliver services. And again, fascism delivers services, not necessarily for as broad a base as we want, but for some, right? Like, I mean, that's
that's true. And, but the tension with that, the tension with, I'm going to put a bunch of loyalists in place, we're going to break every norm we haven't broken already, and we're going to move things forward. Like a good example of that is the fact that Trump is demanding that the Senate adjourn so they can do recess appointments of all his cabinet nominees at once. He just is. There's this recognition that it took a long time to get my people in place, and that slowed down what I was able to do for people, or whatever, in whatever conception he has of that. And even though I have 53 Senate votes, I don't want to wait. And so there's going to be this constant demand for propulsive forward motion, and breaking the kinds of restraints on the system. That's going to be the dominant theme. In tension with that is the other dominant theme of the first Trump presidency that is going to be retained, which is kleptocracy, which is rampant corruption, where friends getting favors is the dominant perspective of what goes on. And so, you asked at one point, where does the prospect come in, or where does media come in? I think that is a key area. Zach Carter had a post-mortem piece where he talked about restoring an era of public accountability. And not just the media, but Democrats themselves, through their various engines in oversight, have a responsibility to do that. And because there's going to be a lot of targets for that accountability.
I just want to also just cite, and then we'll let you go. Ben Rhodes had an interesting piece in the Times on the day after, citing his, sort of studying authoritarian government. And he says, when the Democrats are out there saying protect democracy, what a lot of people are hearing is protect the thing that has, in some instances, immiserated me. So what's the point? And democracy needs to deliver for as many people as possible. Otherwise, people become skeptical of it for a period of time. And hopefully we're not in one of those periods. David Dayen, executive editor of the American Prospect, can't encourage people enough to go over, read your magazine. It's going to be one of those.
And co-host of the Organized Money podcast, which are continuing through the end of the year. organizedmoney.fm. You will get every episode delivered to your mailbox. We have great episodes coming up, and that's with my co-host Matt Stoller, and check that out.
All right, folks. Thank you, David. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.